organ. He said he doesn't need a mic, but if he doesn't use it, you gotta let him know. You can't hear him.
I know.
I don't know. Does it help if you just put it down like that?
Those that can hear me or want to hear me, and those that don't, it's not important either. Thanks to Candy for inviting me to speak on this. Unfortunately, my notes are back there on that red and white chair, so our daughter can better.
He's on it.
Let's start off, if you would please, with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beautiful day that is upon us. We thank you in particularly for the gift of music in this church for the last 170 years, and the many wonderful, absolutely wonderful, God-gifted musicians that this church has nurtured over the many years. We ask that you be with each and every one of us today as we endure this talk and enjoy the refreshments, and all these things are to your grace and glory, our Savior and Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. All right, well, there would be no official program in the Myerstown United Church of Christ in memorable history without a Lily Burkhart joke or two. And for those of you who remember her, will remember that. Three come to mind, one of which I cannot remember, but my wife and I have discussed often, and that's my dislike for cottage cheese. And that came along with a joke out of Lily, again, that I do not remember how it goes, but the punchline was there was a dead mouse in the crock of cottage cheese. And that has stuck with me for the last 50-odd years. However, as we reflect back on Lily and her teachings and the church, you know, we have fellow classmates. There's Kevin Crum or Renee Spangler that all went to Sunday school at the same time I did here, and I think came out much for the better. And several of those teachers that stand out, both of which were musicians, however, one more so than the other, was Lily Burkhart and June Yeagley. Enough cannot be said right now about either one of them. What I can say is, June Yeagley and Renee's mother, Arlene, through thick and thin, and our differences and so forth, because musicians have differences because we're temperamental, nurtured my formative years in music. June especially, that lady could play the piano like I have not heard anyone else play the piano. We had rhythm band in Sunday school if we behaved, and that was nothing more than clanging some instruments around, which still exist over here in the music room. And once in a while, I don't remember for what occasions, we would even be permitted to do that in the sanctuary. And she would play her marches, Susan marches of all, different things of that nature. We'd pound around on our instruments, but what great fun it was. And honestly, what a better way to praise and glorify God.
Amen.
So on to the rest of the story, as our friend Paul Harvey used to say. While we were in Sunday school, Lily would have the way every Sunday, you know, what do you want to sing? And we might put our hands up, well, we want to sing this, we want to sing Jesus Loves Me, whatever. And one Sunday, kid put his hand up, said, I want to sing about my friend. Lily stood there kind of perplexed. We have a friend in Jesus, but that's not a song we know. Now he said, it's my friend. I go to school with this fella, and I want to sing about him. We learned a song. Well, she said, okay, how does that go? Well, he said, it goes very simply. And he walks with me, and he talks with me. Got that, Rebecca? Probably a little bit more said, I want to sing this a certain song. Well, Lily said, what do you want to sing? I want to sing about the laundry song. The laundry song, Lily says. What's a laundry song? Very simple. It goes like this: bringing in the sheets, bringing in the sheets. So maybe we ought to go back to dead mice and cottage cheese. Anyhow, I've been asked, and I'm going to try to make this brief. I don't have a watch in front of me, so if you get tired of all this, just tell me to sit down and shut up. A friend of mine asked, he read in the paper with the closing of this church, he said, about what's this with the Coleman organ? And honestly, until recent years, Renee could probably substantiate, we never referred to it as such. We knew it was a magnificent instrument, played by very magnificent organists. However, in 1980, when Viola Moan and I were doing the history of the church for its 125th anniversary, we discovered various papers in the safe that was in this corner of this room that's no longer, that indicated certain things about that organ, and I researched it as best I could then. So looking briefly back, the organ that you're hearing, and by the way, I should mention the prelude today, I played on all the voices that are truly Roosevelt organ voices, or stops. So anyway, Robert H. Coleman, as we all know, was very, very well-to-do. Founded Cornwall Furnace, Cornwall Ore Bank Company, the smelters there at West Lebanon, which a lot of you recall, numerous railroads, the Mount Gretna Amusement Park, etc. And you know, by the 1870s, he was royalty. He came from a very affluent family, some of the richest, right up there with some of those men that died on the Titanic, that rich and that famous. However, at this time, he started courting a lady by the name of Lily, and they were married. He needed a house suitable for his bride, so he set out and started to build the mansion, as is known, out there in the field across from the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Cornwall. And during that time, his wife became ill. Various sicknesses of that era, 1880, 1881, and they left for Europe to not only see the sights, not only buy furnishings for this mansion, but also to get her healed and well by some of the very notable doctors in Europe, in Paris, France in particular. So, what I have learned is that the organ was not in that building. There was a separate building of some sort that nobody has yet to be able to truthfully tell me where it was, but it was not far from the mansion that had his music room. In this music room was the organ. It was at that time, now this is 1880, the third largest organ in Pennsylvania. So having said that, and why shouldn't it be, it was Robert Coleman. It's just not clear some of the circumstances that took place at that point. I have done research on the Steinway baby grand that's here, that used to sit in this very room. That was built in 1890. There is no paperwork here in the church to substantiate it, but I have a feeling that too was in his music room, because that Steinway, even today, is a very valuable instrument. So, while in Paris, Lily gets sicker. Italy, for parts of Italy, unknown, to find better doctors, more medicine, a climate that would be for healing. Problem is, she passed. And simultaneous to her passing, he was getting telegrams and so forth from home that the construction workers that were building his mansion were doing all sorts of things that were not inappropriate, from basically stealing the man blind with building things, charging building materials and so forth that didn't exist, and were trying to bankrupt him, and that ended that. Coleman immediately returned home via steamship to New York and caught a train, bringing his dead wife home to be buried. So I just said he ordered the mansion to be torn down, unfinished, and simultaneous to that, the members of the Episcopal Church in Lebanon at 6th and Chestnut were building. They just laid their cornerstone, they dug the basement, they were all ready to begin construction of this beautiful church that exists there, and Coleman gave the entire mansion, the stones of the entire mansion, to the Episcopal Church with a dowry of $200,000 to build that church, which they did. As you know, it stands to this day. He was so taken in by all of this that he interred his wife in a crypt below the altar of that church, where she resides to this day. So now we move to 1900. We just left 1880, 1881, and we're going to jump 20 years to 1900. And news is spreading fast about this organ. His lawyers out of Reading wanted the estate disposed of and so forth. Coleman was off and building the Mount Gretna Amusement Park, the famous narrow gauge railroad that was out there. Of course, the Cornwall and Lebanon Railroad that many of you recall seeing the ore trains between Lebanon and Cornwall. He also built the bank that I worked for at 8th and Cumberland Streets, that beautiful sandstone building that still stands as now part of the Catholic Church, was his private bank. And that again speaks volumes on his wealth. So the trustees of our church had a special meeting and decided to buy the organ. And in doing that, they were given several months to decide on all this. It's also known that the sale price of Coleman's organ was to be $1,200. Now that, understand, it's 1900. The instrument when new cost $10,000. Well, I don't know how it was in 1900. I know how it is today. You know, church boards meet and they pontificate about a lot of things and decide nothing. So they were given the ultimatum by the attorney in Reading, your time's up, decide. So we know what the decision was, of course, and the organ was purchased, $1,200, less the water motor which powered the organ. I don't understand a lot about these water motors. I know the early organs had them. The Miller organ in the Lutheran Church in Lebanon at 8th and Willow had one. How they worked, I do not know. But our church did not buy it because it was going to be another $300. Well, now you know our Pennsylvania Dutch ancestors and pinching a nickel here and there. Why get something that frivolity when you can pump the thing by hand? Anyhow, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The church did not have room for this organ. The church then was a lot different than it is today. Some of you are old enough to recall the back balcony. Even with the back balcony, there were balcony on either side of the church as well. On that back balcony stood the original organ. If you go into the bell tower and crawl around, you can see the arched dome that still is painted a beautiful shade of baby blue, where that organ sat and the pipes extended up into that vaulted ceiling. It was also known at the time that the organ was worn out, the original instrument of this church. History reflects that they stopped tolling the bell for funerals because of the excessive vibrations going on in that organ and the pipes. More on that in a bit. So, the organ's worn out, they need a new one. The church board finally voted to do this, and voila, it happened. In, I believe it was March of 1900, the deal was struck, and shortly thereafter, the Daily News reported, and the Daily News covered this organ very well, at least when we bought it. It reported that the church was building an annex to put this instrument in, which still exists. They were going to need and hired 22 horse teams of horses to move the organ over a 3-month period from Cornwall to this church. That was no small undertaking. So, here it is. It's sitting on wagons, and what do we do? The June of 1900, the Daily Newspaper reported that it was here. It's going to take, and I quote, much power to propel the immense blowers to make the wind for this organ. Go back and remember the water motor that we were too cheap to buy. That's still sitting in Cornwall. And the newspaper also reported that electricity will be needed, and the church is considering putting electric light in the sanctuary. I don't think that happened. Now here's why I think that. I know that didn't happen. Harry Wilhelm, who maybe Don would remember, Don Brown might remember Harry Wilhelm. I thought so. A great musician. He played the organ here. He's the one that took the one and only picture of the organ, of the original organ that's here. And he, in a letter to my mother, said that when the organ was installed, there were 2 big arms on it that young men would pump to make the air supply. Well, guess what? That was not adequate. It varies, you know, if 2 people are pumping and they get to talking about last night's ball scores and not paying attention to what's being done, we run out of air. And Reverend Fluke and Harry Wilhelm set out and rigged up, now this was 1910, some sort of electric motor to make air, which apparently was no good either because it was fits and starts and made too much air, didn't make enough air, and the 32-foot contrabass pipes and the 16-foot fagotto pipes were immediately disconnected due to wind supply being inadequate. Those 32-foot pipes stood behind me, not too far behind me, on a wooden ledge that ran directly up through the sanctuary. The 32-foot pipes were not 216 spliced as they are today. They were non-solid pipe. Again, they were disconnected, and Wilhelm noted that 32-foot pipes went to the Larkin Soap Company in New York State. I don't know why. I don't know what the Larkin Soap Company may have done with organ pipes, but they got them. We're moving forward now quickly to 1904, and the Daily News in its headline of the day, November 26, 1904, Dr. Baldwin is here. Okay, so we read about Dr. Baldwin. He was a concert organist out of New York City, coming home from the 1904 World's Fair, and stopped in this town to give a recital on this organ. That's all that's known at this point. But why I'm saying that, why that's important, is to tell you the magnitude and the value of the instrument. And the paper went on to say people from all around came. They must have, by 1904, the two side balconies were removed. The back balcony still was in place. They reported a standing room only crowd with people coming as far away as Lebanon. Again, in 1904, what are our options? Horses, trains, or streetcars, one of the three. So moving into the 1920s, the Mohler Organ Company was called in 1925 to rehabilitate. And at that point, they installed a new motor, a new bellows, new blower system, and the facade of the front was changed. The original picture that is here shows a beautiful bank of organ pipes and walnut casework. I mean, just gorgeous. But in 1925, of course, we were doing all kinds of crazy things with our homes and businesses and churches to modernize and upgrade, and that was done away with. And they hid those pipes behind mesh cloth, much as we have today, all for the princely sum of $346. So we continue to move through the years. I think it's probably time to acknowledge that from 1860 until the present day, the list of organists reads like a who's who in Myerstown music. A lot of names you would know, a lot of names you wouldn't know, but it's really the who of organists. And I think some of that is because of our connections with, in later years, Ursinus College, the college over on Railroads, on College Street, Albright, so on. Mohler at that time told me in a letter dated 1980 that in 1925 they removed much of the Roosevelt organ as it was outdated. It was voiced not appropriate for the 1920s. I don't know what that means, but nonetheless, that's what it meant. And of course, as I told another gentleman, Mohler was in the business of selling organs. Just as some of us sell used cars or real estate or whatever it is we sell, we are going to try to sell you a bill of goods, whether you wanted it or not. And Mohler did that. And Mohler convinced the church to get rid of that antique Roosevelt stuff and go with all modern Roosevelt voices, which they did, or so we thought. It was 1925 they added the chimes that I played a little, and they added the harp that I played, which again was very, very telling, because take a survey of Myerstown churches in 1925 that had the quality set of chimes and a harp that we had. Wasn't anywhere else. So, again, we jump ahead to 1955, a time frame that led to considerable change in the church structure. Since I'm talking, I can simply say it caused numerous arguments in my home. My father, as you know, as well as some of you other men here, were involved in that, Monroe Hawk, others, of changing, and they did. And as I was talking with Emily, musicians are wired a little different than most other folks, and we have strong opinions on things maybe we shouldn't have strong opinions on. And I would have preferred the 1925 church than the 1955 church. That's personal. At that time, spring of '55, the entire organ was removed from this building, shipped to Hagerstown, Maryland, rebuilt, and came back all in time again for another recital by an unnamed person. Daily News didn't feel it necessary to cover these trivialities, and church records don't reflect. We just know there was a recital to rededicate the instrument after it came back in late '55, I believe. And that's how most of us, looking out over this room, remember that organ. We remember in particular two people that come to mind that played it for most of our lives. Maybe not Donald's, but most others. And that was Clara May Umberger and Arlene Spangler. Prior to Clara May was Eunice Maurer. Gotta get that Dutch out of there. The best I can determine in speaking with family members, relation of family, and in particular Jerry Yeagley, Mr. Yeagley's son. Harold Yeagley started here as choir director in 1949. I'm not sure exactly the date he retired. I've not got that far in the research to write about, but it will be written about. The last great hurrah for the organ is 2002, and this is noteworthy. There was a move afoot to do away with the electropneumatic action that powered it, because as those of us who remember it, it's noisy, or was noisy. When you change pistons, you would hear a chiff or a thump. Well, that's the nature of the beast. Just like some cars you crank, some you don't. But we had to do away with that, and they went to the electropneumatic action, beg your pardon, the solid state action that it has today. At that time, there were all sorts of bells and whistles added to it that I discovered last night and had no clue how they work. And that's fine. It's modern in every respect. It should last the next congregation with minimal maintenance and tuning another 100 years. It should be noted, however, in 1900 it only cost $7 to tune that organ. I don't know what we've been paying, but I know it would be considerably more than $7. But what was found out in 2002, which just absolutely, if I must say so myself, rolled my socks. And I didn't realize it until just a month ago when I dug my files out at home and was going through them. In 2002, when Jacob Gerger and Peter Gerger came in and redid the organ, they documented every voice, every stop on that instrument. And what we learned for the first time was that 15 of the 25 ranks, or 2,000 pipes, are still Roosevelt. And I might have said it, if I haven't, please excuse it for redundant, but the prelude this morning was played on nothing but the Roosevelt stops. So now we know it as the Roosevelt-Mohler organ, something that I don't even believe your mother may have ever talked about. Certainly we did, because, again, based on Mohler Company records, they told me it was the thing of the past, they did away with it, it was, antiquated, we don't do that sort of thing, and voila, here it is, you got 15 out of 25 ranks of stops that are Roosevelt. So it is heralded today as that, and it will continue to be known as that, I would hope. And certainly I would also hope moving forward that, and I know because Candy has told me at length, that the new group is very musical. They will continue on, we trust, using it. It would be horrendous to try to remove it. I can't fathom. It has been done other places, but what a shame that would have been. So that kind of brings us to the very end of the Coleman-Roosevelt-Mohler Myerstown United Church of Christ, Oregon. Our forefathers did well. They really did. Enough can't be said of not only the 1900 Board of Trustees, but also the 1925 Board of Trustees that voted to continue using it, that voted to upgrade, and so on. Whether I personally agree or not, it's inconsequential. We need to be thankful for that, for preserving what we have today and are still able to hear it. Churches are losing their pipe organs faster than you can imagine. And tragically, those that can play them are getting fewer. I don't think that'll be the case here. So I mentioned earlier about the original organ, and the church had to stop tolling the bell for funerals because it vibrated the pipes. Well, by golly, it did. And they got rid of that worn-out instrument, as I said. But again, I'm sure there are those in here, Donald again in particular, that would remember the bell being tolled in modern times for funerals. And they did that simply to let the folks in town know, because you counted the number of rings, which was the age of the deceased. So now if we lost two 75-year-olds at the same time, we might have a problem, but nonetheless, this is how what it was for. And which brings me to one of the closing points. The bell here was tolled for the very last time when President Kennedy was shot. My father and Eugene Salem, which was Sylvia's husband, did that. They took turns ringing, while the other one wrote down or put check marks so they didn't ring it too little or too much for President Kennedy's age. That was the very last time, to our knowledge, that the bell was ever tolled. I talked a little bit early to conclude. I talked about some of the wonderful musicians. I've said more than enough on June. I did tell, I believe, I told Jerry, I know that. I don't know if I told Kevin or Sally. We went to visit, my parents and I went to visit June when she was in the West Reading Hospital dying. And I went for one reason, was to first of all tell this person how much I appreciated her as a teacher and a mentor musically, even though she didn't know she was mentoring me. And also, selfish that I am, to have her write down one of the Sunday school songs that she never had a lick of music for. And she laid in her bed, paper and pencil, and wrote down every note of that song, which I somewhere have. Our son or daughter will find it someday and wonder what this is all about, but I haven't. And lastly, I think it would be remiss not to talk just a moment about the very, and I'm chuckling because I'm hearing what Candy said, and she can tell you that if she wishes, about, as I've always referred to, matriarch of this church, and that was Sylvia Salem. Yep, we're laughing, we're chuckling. Those of us that knew that woman, she ran the place with an iron fist. And by golly, you better not step out of line. And for a long time, and I know Renee doesn't know this, and her late mother didn't either. She did before she died. I sat at that organ practicing, playing for hours that only Sylvia and I ever knew. Oh, we couldn't tell Arlene because we didn't want it fussed up, you know, and these kids touching this, and so forth, and getting their peanut butter all over the keys and what have you. But it just was a better time period. And we remember Sylvia in a lot of ways. I know the pictures of the church have all been documented. Some show her in the kitchen. Nobody will ever forget her wonderful meals. And Emily, early touched on about this church being known for its music. I think I've said enough about that. We know this. We've had a wonderful choir over the many years. We've had wonderful choir directors over the many years. But we also had darn good food. And the darn good food was part to Sylvia Salem and that wonderful altar guild that I believe now might all be deceased. And I did dig this out of the showcase. This is a Roosevelt pipe, one of the ones that, I don't know how it got here. I do know. Harry Wilhelm again, kind of being an interesting fella, eccentric perhaps. I think snatched this up before whatever left for Hagerstown in 1900. He would have been a young boy at that time. And it came to the church via, again, Mr. Wilhelm and my mother's relationship, because my mother took piano lessons from him. I'll answer any questions if I can, or I might defer them to Mr. Brown. I don't know. And if there are no questions, thanks for your attentive ears. I've rambled a lot about the history of this organ, but I think you've gathered it's very near and dear to all of us.
David, one quick question. You mentioned about the cornerstone. There is a cornerstone up at the ceiling in the front. Is that the only one? And why is it up there? You would think it's down at the bottom.
You would think.
That's why it's called the
Cornerstone,
cornerstone.
right. But my candy, I wasn't here. I did read, I don't know why, except I think Telma Hawkins' cornerstone is where cornerstone should be, and knowing the tiff that was going on at that time with our people and Telma Hawkins and so on, they probably said, well, we're going to show them up and put it up there. But that's the cornerstone out front up underneath.
Okay, so there is not a second one.
No,
That's it.
no, that's it. And as I said to you, I don't know if there's $1 million in it or a few rotten newspapers of the year. I don't know. The contents were not recorded and in this safe that I ever saw. And in 1980, I had that safe emptied and all hauled out to the top of the hill to my old mom's house. So I can't help with that.
I guess we have to decide whether we want to spend the money to see if there's anything inside.
Right, and that could be
Major
expensive.
project.
Yeah, it could be expensive.
That's a load bearing stone. So I just had to mention that I had a chuckle when you were saying about the cost of the organ components and what have you, because I can, to give everybody a perspective of what we're talking about now. It was a number of years ago, I know when on our insurance liability policy, we had a rider on that policy for the organ, and that rider was $1 million insurance policy on that organ.
Which real quick, that just reminded me of a little anecdote. We almost lost that organ to an electric storm that passed through this town. How I know all that? Because I was here. It was one of those nights Arlene didn't know I was here. And it was a Friday night, practicing, playing, just for my own fun. And I had all the windows open, and a storm blew in, rather bad one. And I immediately shut the windows, I had presence of mind to shut the organ down, kill the electricity, that if we were struck, it wouldn't damage the instrument. I came down here, sat in that corner right back there at the baby grand, and played, but it was raining so hard you'd been soaked to get to the car. And there was a clap of thunder like, well, I hope I don't ever hear again. I don't know what it was to this day. I do not know what it was, but I will describe it as a ball of fire. Came right through here, right out there, and made a sound like, again, I don't ever want to hear. So I collected myself and went over to the parsonage. Reverend Deacle and his family were there. And of course, the parsonage wasn't locked. I walked right in. And they're all laying on the floor. But Pastor Deacle was on his feet at that time and said, we just were hit, we just took a direct electric strike. And we went upstairs, bathroom and parsonage on the second floor. Bathroom is right at the window at the breezeway. It goes there. That ball of fire, electricity, whatever it was, followed the roof line of that breezeway and stopped when it hit the parsonage and pushed the 12-foot tub at least 6 inches away from the wall. But why I'm saying that, Eddie, it did damage the organ, even though there was no electricity to it at the time.
I should be able to recall that story.
Well, I tell you what, and my wife will verify this. I get really, really weird. And it just happened maybe last year or 2 years ago. She and I were driving along and a bolt of lightning hit a tree and I just went to pieces. It was that frightening. So I shouldn't have ended on a note about me. It's not about me. Anything else?
Any questions from anyone?
I have just a question about the trustees who are making the decisions. Do you have like a list of who they were?
Yes, I don't have it with me, but I can tell you exactly who sat on what board of trustees for those years. And if the church didn't record it, which it did, the Daily News recorded it in great detail. I mean, they could have sold ice cubes to Eskimos. What they recorded about this, the organ and it coming here and you know, it was almost like a second wonder. So I'm thinking, well, what did the other churches do? I mean, the Lutheran was right across the street. They had a fine instrument. I know that. I think they might have had a Bachman. Methodist Church. You know, I don't know. But if nothing else, we were the musical church.
David, you had mentioned it slightly. I just wanted your opinion on the Steinway back there. Because when the people who were purchasing the church went into that room, they flipped out when they saw that piano.
Yeah.
I just wanted your opinion on that. You know,
In what regard?
pardon?
In what regard? What are you soliciting?
Well, supposedly it has a broken soundboard. To me, it sounds pretty darn good when they played it. It sounded darn good to me.
Well,
Is it worth?
I would leave it. You want my
Yeah.
unwashed
Yeah.
opinion? I would leave it.
They'd be very happy.
They would be happy with it. It's not going to realize the amount of money it's worth because nobody wants these
Right.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
If they do, I'll sell you a baby grand that I have myself. I heard that, Rebecca.
Sorry, that was your wife.
Oh, that was right. No, it has a cracked soundboard. It depends where it was cracked. They can be repaired. But I've been told that's in the $30,000 to $40,000 neighborhood.
Well, all I know is their young pianist made it sound superb.
Yeah. It has a broken leg. That famous sexton, I think, was trying to move it and busted the back leg, but it's fixed. I mean, it doesn't matter. But the soundboard, I don't think that soundboard's been cracked for
That's
decades.
what they said.
Because when it was still in this room, it was restrung. The entire piano was restrung to the tune of 12,000. But that's when it was played weekly in this room. And it originally lived in the sanctuary. But then we had to modernize, remember that, and get away with it. So, yeah, that.
Well, we thank you so
Oh.
much. Oh my goodness, and you are going to be continuing up until until the 170th anniversary, which is this year, right?
Yeah, I probably can't conclude it until you decide, more decisions are made in your future.
But we want to have it made into booklets and everyone have a good
Absolutely.
complete.
Yes, and anybody old enough is welcome to text or email me. I've talked at length with Kevin, I've talked at length with some of the Yegleys, with Candy, with Renee, anything that you think is worth talking about that you remember. If any of you were here for my baptism and I wet my diaper and tingled all over Reverend Jeffers, write it down. It's just important to gather this stuff into the final chapter.
Again, many, many, many thanks.